What are your names?
Joyce Berkman.
John Bracey.
My name is Stefana. And what is your relationship to the program here?
I'm one of the founders of Women's Studies. I taught the first courses in U.S. women's history and in U.S. actually not only U.S. women's history but English women's history and European women's history in the early 70s, and helped establish a line in history, not only for myself, but lines that developed for others to teach women in other parts of the world, and then also others doing women's history of the United States. But my connection with women's studies, I've been on the executive committee for many, many, many years. I have served on various search committees. I'm very committed to the program. I'm adjunct, theoretically. Technically, I'm an adjunct faculty member.
Yeah, I think I am too.
Like Marta over there.
Yeah, I'm in African American Studies, and I taught a course in our department that was taught originally by Janetta Cole and Esther Terry. And when they both moved up, I kind of took over the kind of black women's course. And then Joyce and I hooked up when they had Women's Studies and Black Studies had a 2-year FIPSI grant. And it was a 2-year, kind of seminar with Black Studies faculty, Women's Studies faculty. And one of the goals was, in fact, to produce a curriculum. So Joyce and I produced the first kind of large-scale undergraduate course in Black women's history called No Crystal Stair.
Right.
That was about like 1983, I think it was. But earlier I had mentioned in the other room that when I first got here in 1972, Ali Navakian and Dale Melcher came and asked me to come talk about Ida B. Wells in their Intro to Women's Studies class because they were reading Crusader for Justice, the autobiography of Ida B. Wells. And that was my first kind of contact with people in women's studies.
John has been a stalwart supporter, and there are a number of others in AFRAM as well who've worked in collaboration on various conferences.
Yeah, we had two big
development.
conferences,
We had
yeah.
two huge. We had the 80s spokes.
60 Speak to the 80s.
60s speak to the 80s, and then there was another one I remember
African
too.
American Women in the Vote
Yes.
in 1987.
That's right. We were all-
Largest gathering of African American feminist scholars. 3-day conference on the politics of African American women, starting in the 19th century, coming all the way down to the present. And the proceedings were published by UMass Press, a book called African American Women in the Vote, which actually won a prize. The Association of Black Women Historians gave it a prize the year it came out in 1997 as the best collection that came out, of essays that came out that year. We're kind of proud of that too.
So do you all have a favorite memory from or while you were working closely or still working with the program?
Oh goodness, that's hard because there's so many memories.
Yeah.
We would have needed advanced prep on that. My memories have to do with students. I've had so many remarkable women's studies students who've been exploring science and history questions, social history questions, have gone on to important careers. So I think most of my memories are with students.
Yeah, my most striking memory is a women's studies student came into my office to get Melinda Chateau.
Yes,
Mindy Chateau.
Chateau,
And
Chateau
said she was working on women in the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. And, she's tall, blonde, blue-eyed and all. I'm saying, yeah, right. And she's absolutely brilliant. She published a book on women in the sleeping car porters, and now she's doing kind of history of black sexuality. She's on the faculty in Black Studies at the University of Maryland in College Park. And over the years, I've had people just show up because Arlene or other people in women's studies has sent them to me to be on their master's theses committees and so forth. And I've been pleasantly surprised at the sincere interest in the topic. It wasn't people just doing something on a lark. I mean, a deep kind of commitment to studying the African American experience. And it wasn't their major, but it's always been a pleasant surprise to have students like that come out of women's studies.
And I just want to add two other dimensions to all of this that I think is important. One is that we are supported in a 5-college system here. From early on, the other campuses also developed women's studies and feminist studies programs, and we all supported each other so that if a faculty member was coming up for tenure and it was an iffy issue, then faculty even from the other campuses would meet together and try to give support, so that there is this matrix of campuses that contributed to the strength of our program. The other is that our program spawned so many kinds of undertakings, and the Valley Women's History Collaborative, which I launched with some others, has been has been an outcome of the kind of energy that a program like UMass's Women's Studies enables and inspires.
Yeah, and also unlike a lot of other campuses, in fact most other campuses, there was never any friction between African American studies and women's studies. We always collaborated. We always had each other's back. We've had some administrators that have tried to divide us by saying, if African American studies has the positions we like to give to women's studies, what do you think about that? He says, no. Women's studies, we support what they want, they support what we get. And we've avoided the kind of fratricidal kind of fights that happen on other campuses where you get a tension between interdisciplinary programs where you're fighting for scarce resources. We support each other's efforts to expand all of our resources. So we support the hiring of black women in women's studies, whether they're in our department or not. Our students, take, our courses meet the requirement in women's studies. We get a lot of women's studies majors and minors in our classes.
Women's studies here require students to take a course outside of the Euro-American, experience, and requires that they do work with women of color.
Yeah.
Outside and inside.
Yeah.
So what do you think of the new name of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies, going from when it was just Women's Studies?
New name?
New name. I understand the reasons for it, and I'm not. I have ambivalent feelings, frankly, because if you're going to unpack the term further, I would have liked to have seen then race and ethnicity and nationality, and I'm not sure why women, gender, and sexuality is encompassing of all these other identifications, granted the fluidity of identity and everything else that was spoken about earlier. But I understand that in terms of attracting students to the program, that women's studies did not speak for the breadth of our gender and sexuality interpretations and analysis in those categories. And so if we're going to attract men and a lot of women who do not necessarily want to do their own research and teaching or learning in women and are more interested in gender, sexuality, by having this kind of name, it has a greater appeal.
My position is the same. Women's studies is autonomous. They can name themselves whatever they're happy with. We name ourselves what we name ourselves. They name themselves what they name themselves.
So I think you touched on this a little bit, but what are your hopes for the future of the program, or where would you like to see the program go?
Well, I would like to see it sturdily supported. I'd like to see about 3 or 4 more faculty members. I'd like to see actually a established institutionalized master's and doctoral degree program. We have an advanced certificate we have a certificate in advanced feminist studies. It's fine, but I think we can offer more, and I would like to see that as a 5-college, not just a UMass founded kind of interdisciplinary advanced degrees in feminist studies. I'd like to see a master's and a doctorate that's 5-college in women, gender, and sexuality studies.
Yeah, I think as the university is transforming the undergraduate curriculum and the graduate curriculums now, I think it makes perfect sense to expand interdisciplinary programs like African American Studies and Women's Studies, because I think that's the way the future is. I think the putting together, sequences of courses, certificate programs and so forth is the kind of wave of the future for the undergraduate curriculum and the graduate curriculum. I think the traditional boundaries have been shown to be not quite adequate to get people, ready to go out into the world. And so I think people should recognize that we're at the front of the academy, not at the back of the academy, and that resources ought to, keep us at the front rather than see it as an add-on and so forth.
And I think we are a case study, a poster child in interdisciplinarity, which is now the choice term that administrators are using here and elsewhere.
Yeah, we've been doing it for like 40 years.
That's right.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Joyce.
Yeah. Thank you.
Glad to be.
Yeah.